Hey, face front, true believers!
Comic books have been around for a long time, and the way their storylines and characters have evolved is a reflection of ourselves and our culture. Comic books are entertaining, sure, but there's more. This documentary will explore some of the influences behind the evolution of comic books into what they are today, an empire that began with serial comic books that now comprises multiple universes of beloved characters. These characters and their adventures speak to the human experience with a presence that is expanded into a multitude of additional media, including television series, movies, and video games. Comic books provide entree into a vibrant and exciting world to those who follow the characters and lay down their money each week to learn the latest exploits of their heroes. We will take a look through the panels to explore the story behind comic books and comic book culture today.
I started reading comic books when I was a little kid. My mom would bring me just random boxes of comic books that she would get at the grocery store. And then I started going to the grocery store and seeing them in the aisles, and I'd pick them up, and they were great, and I'd read them, and then I'd throw them away. And eventually I figured out that the next one continued the story. And so I kept them and kept getting more and more. And the very first time I went into an actual comic book store, I didn't know such a thing existed, right? Because I always got my comics at like the Schnoops or 7-Eleven. And my mom looked in a phone book and saw that there was an actual comic book store. It was like 30 miles away. But we drove out there, and I went through the door, and I was just like stunned. Like on every wall there were comic book posters, and like I'd just never seen anything like it. And at that point I knew that there was like an entire culture based on comic books, and I wanted in.
Everyone talks about jumping on points for comic books, but one of the fun parts of it is feeling like you're walking into the middle of some big universe that's been going on for years and years and years, and then wanting to find out everything about it.
You reach a certain age where people say, are you still reading comic books? Grow up. And you sort of want to, think, yeah, I am getting up there, I'm 13, I shouldn't still be reading Archie and Betty and Veronica and Jughead, should I? But I left them behind for the longest time, because I was mature. And then when I got into college and I had a little time to go to used bookstores, I started discovering old comic books. The history of comic books is a fascinating history. It's not that old, Superman he's only a little over 70 years old, 1938, June of 1938, so it's not like ancient history.
A lot of the things that I like about comic books or about Star Trek or Star Wars is the idea of this really massive universe, that it's not just this one 30-minute story, that the 30-minute story you're telling is based in a reality where every character has a life beyond that, and maybe has alliances and other friends and villains that'll show up from time to time. And so I always really like the way that Marvel and DC have created these amazing universes that just go on for decades.
These are, for all intents and purposes, the myths and legends of our lives. So you'd have to go all the way back to when Greek legends were being told and Roman legends of the gods were being told. I think that probably at the end of the day, a lot of it has to do with wish fulfillment. It has to do with the idea that we all, deep down inside, want to be better than we are, which I think is a good thing and very much about the human condition. So that when we get to read stories about superheroes, it really is the best version of ourselves, whether it is that they can fly or that they can turn invisible or that they can lift up a car. It's just one more step that we hope someday that we're going to be able to achieve. The fact that they also are flawed, that they also have problems, that they also can't always win, is something that makes them completely compelling from our point of view, so that we're always drawn back to these characters.
To have a superhero who isn't appreciated, I also think adds a degree of reality, because so many people do good things, but they don't get credit for them, and they're often misunderstood. And I thought people could relate to that, because everybody thinks he's misunderstood.
But I guess it's just something that I loved as a kid that I never gave up liking, you know? Because when I was your age, I'm thinking, you know, am I going to eventually grow up and not like the Beatles anymore? Or not like the Rolling Stones? My dad hates them.
All comic books about superheroes, they're fairy tales. In fact, I'll give you a little bit of my philosophy about that. Most people, when they were very young, loved to read fairy tales. They loved stories of giants and witches and monsters and dragons and all sorts of things, because they were colorful and they were unusual. But you get a little older and you become too old to read fairy tales. But I don't think you ever outgrow your love for that type of thing. So, all of a sudden, you're now older, but along come comic books with superheroes. And lo and behold, those are very similar to the fairy tales you read when you were young. Because now you have people who can fly and who are extra strong, and villains with superpowers just like the witches in the old fairy tales. So to me, comic books, and more than comic books, fantasy stories are like fairy tales for grown-ups.
I loved you're talking the alternate realities. When I was little, it was called Imaginary Stories, where Lois was married to Superman. And if you really thought about it, you know, what do you mean imaginary stories? Aren't they all?
But there's also something about that essential idea of, you know, of the secret identity. The idea that maybe there's something special about each of us that, you know, it's a secret that we know, but other people don't know it about us until they really get to know us. And I think that's kind of a compelling theme that's been in comics and, you know, has really worked and kind of keeps people interested.
Then once you get in there, if it's well written, if it's well drawn, you begin to learn about the human experience. It's got lessons to teach about the human experience. And comics is very good at that because it can give you a character's interior thoughts. If you want, it can stop and play the relationships between characters, the dynamics between these characters, and yet it can put it on a grand scale so that you can address everything from, you know, the hugeness of war to the smallness of, you know, how are we going to earn a living today. Heroic exploits, I think, have to do with archetypes that are hardwired actually into our psyches. You know, they go back so far, you know, Homer's Odyssey and the notion of superheroes is not actually a new notion. Putting them in tights and capes, that's a relatively new, you know, 20th century idea. But at least the tights are, not the capes.
When I'm writing the story, I'm just trying to think, I have a hero who can do this. I have to get a villain who seems to be stronger than the hero. I've got to put the hero in a situation that it looks like he'll never get out of this. That's what makes it interesting. Then I got to figure a clever way for him to get out of it, and also a believable way. Now, if death is only the ultimate thing that you have to worry about, you don't want the hero to die. So the closer he seems to be to death, the more you're worried.
It's about ongoing stories. People, you know, some people die, some people are born. Life goes on. That's the nature of life, and to me, that's one of the reasons that I love television. One of the reasons I love comics is this notion of the ongoing story, the never-ending story.
I had to fight my publisher. I'd use a word like antediluvian or obtuse or anything, and he'd say, "Stan, nobody's gonna know what that means." I said, "Well, they'll look it up. It's over. They'll know what it means. It's in the story." He said, and finally he left me alone. He didn't want to argue all the time. And it doesn't mean I don't go for big words, but I like to use whatever word is proper, germane for that particular bit of dialogue, you know. I used to read a lot, so I've read everything. And it goes back to the fact I had only one rule in mind when I wrote something. As I say, it should be entertaining, but the main rule was it had to be something that I would want to read. If I wouldn't want to read it, why should I inflict it on somebody else?
I think anytime that you have an element that involves reading, it's a good thing. I think a lot of people see comics as a picture medium, but as the writer who writes the dialogue and who spends time trying to put those word balloons on the page, I know that there's an awful lot of reading to do.
I think reading anything encourages literacy, but the important thing is, literacy is only encouraged if you're reading something you enjoy. If it's something that's a chore, or something unpleasant to you, or you're only doing it because you were told to read it, or you'll get a failing mark in school, that doesn't encourage literacy. But if you can pick up a book and enjoy reading it, that gives you the reading habit. It makes you want to read more things that you'll enjoy, which again is why I say, to me, entertainment is the most important thing. Reading should be entertaining. If the stories are entertaining enough, then somebody will want to read. And the more you read, the more you develop a facility at reading.
I feel like I learned to read on comic books. So I feel like I can speak Russian because Chris Claremont always put Russian words in like X-Men. So I mean, I think that, you know, as far as expanding vocabulary and just practicing reading and like that desire and love of reading, comic books can do that in ways that a lot of other stuff can't.
Now it's funny because years ago parents would say, I don't want my child reading comics. And looking at those pictures, they stifle his imagination. I want him to read a regular book and imagine what's happening. And I used to think that was funny because that would be like saying, read Shakespeare, but don't go to see a Shakespeare play because that's going to stifle your imagination.
It seems right now that the world has become much more aware of them because of their successful transfer into movies. The X-Men and all the Marvel characters and Wolverine and so forth, and Spider-Man is huge. You know, a few years back it was impossible to imagine doing Spider-Man the way they should do it because the special effects weren't up to it at that point. I mean, just look at the old TV version of Spider-Man, you know, it's not a patch on what they're able to do now with computers.
Certainly there's, you know, a move toward digital with comics, but I think comics are different from a lot of the other media because there's always been the collector aspect to the hobby. That it's not just reading the stories, it's also collecting the comics. And we're finding that there are a lot of people who are coming back to us or coming to us for the first time because they are finding comics on their iPad or on their phone, and they're going, oh, I'm interested, but they're finding that the experience isn't necessarily the same, or when they're done with the comic, they don't get to do what they used to do, which is, close it up and put issue 3 between issue 2 and 4 and have a full, have a collection or be able to feel like they own the comic.
But I think they'll always probably be comic books. They won't be as big as they were, but there's still something nice about a little comic book that you can read, you can fold it up, kind of put it in your back pocket, you can share it with a friend, you can save them, they don't take up much room, you can pile them up on a shelf and reread them. I think we'll always have comics.
I think one of the things that's a very unique experience that you can't have any place else is the relationship between the reader and the comic book itself. One of the things that we get from television and from movies and from animation is you get the full experience of what happens to the hero. So that when Spider-Man is on top of a building and swings across the city and then goes to the next location, you see all of that. There's nothing in your mind where you have to fill it in. Whereas comics themselves, without you really even knowing about it, you'll see Peter Parker standing on a roof, then you'll see another panel of Spider-Man swinging, and then you'll see wherever it is that he's landed. But the actual movement itself, that's something that you bring to the experience, so that it's a very unique and personal relationship between you and the story. It enables you and it challenges you to bring your imagination. And I think that's the reason why comics will be something that always stay with us, because they enable all of us to be able to use our imagination and actually be part of the experience of telling the story of this hero and you.
Excelsior!